Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. I'm here today with episode 326 of Weekly Poker Hand. I hope you're all having a fantastic week. We have another hand from 2-2 No Limit Texas Hold'em at Best Bet Jacksonville. The game has been very action-packed, so I'm excited to see how this one plays out. Here we have Pocket Queens in the hijack seat for Jamie. He raises it up to $13, or rather big raise, but in these games a lot of people do make very big raises. When you are playing a game where people do make big raises, like 7 big blinds pre-flop, you should be folding a ton because they're risking a lot to win $4, right? And when that's the case, you just don't need to play marginal hands. Now, if your opponent is like especially terrible post-flop, then you can call in position with hands that flop decently well. I do understand that the players are somewhat deep stacked. They're playing about $600 deep for the most part. So you can splash around with hands with big implied odds in those instances, but you should certainly not play hands that are very easily dominated or hands that have big reverse implied odds like, Ace 7 offsuit or King 9 offsuit. These hands should just always be folded. And if you are going to play them, you should be 3-betting with them because if you call, you're just going to end up having to fold out on a lot of flops when you don't make anything. All right, so Jamie does raise with Pocket Queens to $13. Folds around to MJ on the button with King 9 offsuit. Seems like an easy fold to me, but he does call. If you are going to play this hand, like I said, you'd much prefer to 3-bet. Folds around to Clinton in the big blind with Queen 9 offsuit. This is another very good example of a spot where you certainly should fold. If Jamie's playing a reasonable range, it's going to be a lot of good, strong, big cards. And if MJ is playing a reasonable range, it's going to be a lot of good, strong, big cards and pairs and suited connectors for both players too. And Queen 9 offsuit is going to be very dominated in this scenario. If you were playing against a $6 raise, though, a 2 big blind raise, or 3 big blind raise, then yeah, you can call with a Queen 9 because you're getting amazing pot odds. But here, you're not. And when you're not getting good pot odds, you should not splash around with marginal hands. This is a big mistake a lot of people make. And the thing is most people in the small stakes games don't even realize they're making an error because almost everyone in the small stakes games are making the same error. And if everyone makes the same mistake, no one really wins or loses any money because of it. But if you do not consistently make this mistake of calling with hands that are very likely dominated, you're just going to print money in these games. So anyway, King 9 offsuit should have folded, Queen 9 offsuit should have folded, and we should have been done with the hand. Instead, we get to see the flop 3 ways. Queens against King 9 against Queen 9. Flop comes. The dealer's body's in the way. We'll see it in a minute. They're keeping it a mystery for us. There we go. King, Jack, 7. And the Pocket Queens makes a bet. So on King, Jack, 7, I think the best play is definitely to check. This is a spot where once the big blind checks, they're going to check with everything. If you bet and get called or raised on King, Jack, 7, 2 spades, you just have to fold. And the problem is that if you bet and get called, you don't know if you're against a king, which you're almost dead against, a jack, which probably won't put a ton more money in unless it improves, or a good draw that has plenty of outs because on King, Jack, 7 there are just loads of draws with loads of potential bad cards for you. So in multi-way pots, you have to be very cautious with marginal made hands, especially when you're out of position, because in this scenario, MJ is on the button. And I think this is a pretty easy check. And if you do check, and MJ bets, and Clinton calls or raises, you just fold your queens and you lose no money. It's okay to just check fold with a hand that was good pre-flop, but became significantly weaker on the flop. And when there's an overcard, your hand is much weaker. And you may say, but don't I run the risk of getting outdrawn if I let it check? Yeah, you do, but also, you have to look at the other side of this, right? If you bet and get called, you're just putting money in thin to dead when you do get called. And also, don't forget that if your opponent does have a draw on the turn and they miss, they may even decide to bluff you out of the pot at that point, which would also be terrible for you. So you're going to have a really tough time getting a lot of money in ahead with Pocket Queens in this scenario. And in multi-way pots, you just need to check and then check call if one player bets and check fold if you miss. And you should also be checking here with some kings, like hands like King 10, maybe even King Queen are fine to check, especially given MJ on the button could easily have a king and could easily have like decently strong hands in this scenario. So you have to be very, very cautious. I actually have a whole chapter in my most recent book, Excelling at Tough No-Limit Hold'em Games. Ooh, let me show it to you. Here it is, Excelling at Tough No-Limit Hold'em Games, featuring content from me and many of the best online players in the world. They're absolute crushers. You can get this at jonathanlittlepoker.com/tough, T-O-U-G-H. And I have a chapter in this book devoted to playing multi-way pots. And a big mistake most people make is they just splash around with too many marginal hands. And like I said earlier, a lot of people in the small stakes games make this mistake on a very regular basis, and it results in them literally never being able to move above the small stakes because they're just making this error, and the players who don't make this error print money against them. So anyway, Jamie bets $22, which is half pot. MJ makes the easy call with his king nine. There's no point in raising king nine here. It's a clearly marginal made hand, right? You only want to be raising in these spots with your best made hands and your draws. And king nine in this spot is clearly not one of your best made hands you're just happy to blast your money in with. And then around to Clinton, he has to put in 22 to try to win 100 with a gut shot, but it's a bad gut shot. I think it's a fold because it's at least somewhat feasible for one of the two players to have ace queen here some portion of the time. When you're drawing to a hand that is not necessarily like a good hand, but not the nuts, you have to be very, very cautious. And when you're out of position, you need to be even more cautious. If Clinton was in position with queen of spades, nine of clubs on king of spades, jack of spades, seven of diamonds, like maybe you can call in position in this scenario. But even then, I think it's very close to a fold. From out of position, though, you just have to get out of the way because he's drawing to a lot of very, very marginal hands. So just fold immediately, Clinton. All right, turns to four of hearts, complete blank. Clinton checks. Back to Jamie again with his marginal pair of queens. Seems like a very, very easy check to me now. Once you bet the flop and get two callers, you're against some combination of premium made hands, or at least better made hands, like a king, right? Made hands that you beat, but that still have a lot of equity, like Jack 10, and then draws that have a lot of equity. And in this spot, when you bet, what is going to keep calling you? Well, it's going to be mostly the kings and better for made hands, because if you're betting and somebody's sitting here with a jack, they're aware that you or the other player in the pot could have a king, right? And you're going to be getting called by very good draws. And this is a scenario where you just want to check. You need to check in this spot. You have to check. Cannot make it any more clear. Betting here is not a good strategy. Pot's $107. He bets $51. When he starts to bet large, like 50 or 100, what's going to give you action? Well, like literally only a king and good draws, in which case you're in very, very bad shape. King 9, facing this bet, interestingly enough, I think this is close to a fold. And the reason I think it's close to a fold is because this player's betting. He raised pre-flop, so he has to have something decent. He's betting the flop on king jack 7 into two people, and then he keeps betting the turn. It's got to be something good, right? And if it's something good, it's going to be better kings and premium draws. So how do you fare against better kings and premium draws? Not great with your king 9 either. Also, you have to worry about Clinton in this pot with who knows what he has. He could easily have a better king as well. So look, I'm not going to say you should fold the king 9 in this spot, but I think it is starting to get very close. Like I would never fold king 10 or king queen, but if I had like king 2, it's probably a fold. If king 2 is a fold, then king 9 might as well be pretty close to a fold. It's on the cusp, that's for sure. If I had queens in this scenario, I'd definitely fold, right? Facing a bet. If I had queen jack, I would definitely fold. So anyway, king 9 does call. Queen 9 now is a really easy fold. He does make the easy fold. We see the river heads up. River is the 7 of spades. So the flush draw comes in and bottom card pairs. So now queens just became absolute trash. Queens is almost certainly not the best hand here unless you're against exactly a jack. If you do check in the spot, you will still win every once in a while when you were against a jack that decided to call your turn bet, but you just can't win this pot here. Question is, should you try to bluff? Should you try to make a king fold? Probably not. I don't think we can really count on people folding a king. And Jamie does finally check. He realizes his queens are probably not in great shape. Around to MJ with the king. Should he turn this into a bluff? No. Should he value bet this? Can he get called by a jack if he bets when the 7 pairs and the flush card comes? Almost certainly not. He does just like to check it back. And I think actually king 9 played this hand great besides the pre-flop call. If you do have to see the flop with a king 9, realize it's a very marginal made hand, call the flop, call the turn, check the river, play a medium pot, right? But I think in this scenario, queens was substantially overplayed. And this is what happens to a lot of players where they have a really good pre-flop hand, but it just gets worse on the flop. I know a few of the more recent episodes of Weekly Poker Hand have dealt with this, and it's because this is a common mistake a lot of people make. They don't properly understand that hand values change substantially as the board gets better or worse for you. And if there's an overcard, underpairs get a lot worse, and if you have a strong underpair, it's not necessarily garbage that should be check folded, but it is a very clear marginal made hand. We actually discussed this a lot at pokercoaching.com, my training site, in the homework. You can go get a free trial membership and you can check out some of the homework. And I explain how to play your entire range. And in scenarios like this, where you have a marginal made hand like queens or ace jack or queen jack on king jack 7, it's just a check and see what develops. And if it checks down or you get to put one bet in, you probably have the best hand. But if you bet the flop and the turn and you get called, you're very, very frequently beat, and that is not where you want to be. So by putting in a lot of money, yes, you make it a little bit more difficult for your opponents to outdraw you, but in exchange for that, you just lose way more money than necessary against the better hands. And in this scenario, there are clearly lots of better hands in both of the opponent's ranges. That's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed this hand. Do not overplay your marginal made hands, especially multi-way pots. I do not want to see any of you ever making that mistake again. Good luck in your games. Have fun. If you enjoyed this video, click like, click subscribe, and share it with your friends. I would appreciate that. I'll talk to you next week.